You have 1 week to come up with an extra $500 for rent. Or you're out on the street. That was the ultimatum my 42-year-old daughter gave me. What she didn't know was that she was threatening the man who secretly owned her house. And she had just lit the fuse on a plan that would cost her everything. If you believe that respect for elders is non-negotiable, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this is a story you won't want to miss. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 7. It was a sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. A deep, sonorous bong that measured out my days in this house. The clock had been my father's, a mahogany giant that stood silent sentinel over a family that felt less and less like my own. I sat at the polished granite island in the kitchen, a surface always wiped clean, always cold to the touch. The whole house was like that, spotless, orderly, but utterly devoid of warmth. It was a museum of a life, not a home. In front of me, fanned out like a poker hand, I was destined to lose, were 20 crisp, $100 bills. I picked up the stack, the paper smooth and eerily weightless. My fingers, gnarled with age and a touch of arthritis. I went through the familiar motions, 1, 2, 3, all the way to 20. $2,000. It wasn't a question of having the money, but the act of counting it, of preparing this monthly tribute, felt like a small, private humiliation. It was the price of admission to my own life. I slid the bills into a plain white envelope, the kind you buy in a box of 100 at the supermarket. Using a pen from the ceramic jar next to the sink, I wrote a single, stark word on the front: rent. I had just placed the envelope on the counter when the click-clack of heels on the hardwood floor announced the start of my day. Brenda entered the kitchen not as a daughter greeting her father, but as a CEO entering a boardroom at 42. She was sharp angles and sharper ambition. Dressed for a day of corporate conquest in a tailored blazer and pencil skirt, the faint, expensive scent of her perfume cut through the comforting aroma of the coffee I had just brewed. Her eyes? The same deep blue as her mother's, but lacking all their warmth. Did a quick, efficient scan of the room before landing on their target. The envelope. Morning. Dad, she said. The words automatic, devoid of feeling. She didn't pause. She glided to the counter, picked up the envelope, and in one fluid motion, ripped it open. Her thumb and forefinger flew through the bills with the speed of a bank teller. A silent, perfect count. Satisfied. She slipped the wad of cash into a zippered pocket of her leather handbag. The transaction was complete. Thanks, she said, turning to pour herself a mug of my coffee without asking. The electric bill was higher this month. By the way, your television is always on. I gripped my own mug, the ceramic warm against my palms. I wanted to tell her that the television was my only companion most nights, that the flickering blue light and the meaningless chatter of late-night shows were the only things that kept the crushing silence of this big, empty house at bay. I wanted to say that I was the one who went around turning off the lights. She and her husband always left blazing. But I said nothing. Arguing was a currency I could no longer afford to spend. It yielded no returns, so I just stared into the black liquid in my mug, watching the steam curl and vanish into the air. The feel of the money, even the ghost of it on my fingertips, was a powerful current, pulling me back through 2 decades of this strange, secret life. I was suddenly 20 years younger, sitting in our cramped, 2-bedroom apartment across town. The air was thick with the smell of Eleanor's beef stew. She sat across from me, her reading glasses perched on her nose. the flimsy lottery ticket held between us like a sacred text, $1.8 million. The number was so vast, so absurd. It felt like a typo. We didn't shout. We didn't cry. We just stared at each other as the world tilted on its axis. Eleanor, my practical, far-sighted Eleanor, had been the one to lay down the law. We can't tell them. Cecil, she'd said, her voice firm but laced with a sadness that broke my heart. You know what will happen. It won't be a blessing, it'll be a curse. It will tear them apart. She was right. She saw Brenda's desperate need to appear successful and Kevin's reckless optimism that was always one bad investment away from disaster. The money wouldn't fix them. It would only amplify their flaws. So we hatched our plan. A quiet act of love and preservation. I took a piece of the winnings and bought this house. A beautiful 4-bedroom colonial with a big yard on a tree-lined street in Maple Creek, Ohio. I remember telling the kids we'd found an incredibly generous landlord. Their relief was palpable. For years, while Eleanor was alive, it was our secret joy. Watching our family thrive in a home we had provided, a safe harbor they never knew existed. But after she was gone, the secret felt less like a joy and more like a lead weight in my gut. I sold our old apartment, moved in with Brenda and her family, and the performance began. I, the landlord, became the tenant. For God's sake, Brenda. The voice belonged to Mark, my son-in-law, who had appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was holding a wrench like it was a dead rat. The faucet in the downstairs bath is dripping again. That's the 3rd time this year. He wasn't talking to me, but his eyes flickered in my direction. A quick, accusatory glance. It's always something. You'd think for what he pays, things around here would just work. I felt my shoulders hunch, an involuntary retreat into myself. I was a problem to be managed. A dripping faucet. A line item on a spreadsheet of household expenses. I quietly stood, carried my mug to the sink, and rinsed it with methodical care, focusing on the simple, physical task to ground myself. The front door opened and closed later that afternoon. And, for the first time all day, a genuine warmth entered the house. It was my granddaughter, Chloe. She dropped a heavy stack of textbooks on the table. The sound, a happy disruption to the sterile silence. At 19, she was a bright, chaotic, wonderful spark of life. Grandpa, she threw her arms around my neck, and I breathed in the scent of fresh air and youthful energy. You're looking thoughtful today. Don't let Mom get to you. Her insight was a small miracle. She was the only one who seemed to notice the weather behind my eyes. Her hug was a sturdy anchor in the turbulent waters of my daily life. I made a breakthrough in my history paper, she said, her eyes alight with passion. We sat for nearly an hour, and she told me all about the fall of the Roman Empire, asking for my thoughts, actually listening to my answers. In those moments, I wasn't a tenant or a burden. I was just her grandpa. Our conversation was interrupted by the tinny ring of my cell phone. I glanced at the screen, my son. Kevin. A familiar sense of exhaustion washed over me. Hey, Dad. How's it going? He began. The false cheer in his voice, setting my teeth on edge. He didn't wait for an answer. Listen, I've got this incredible opportunity. A real estate venture. Flipping condos. It's a sure thing. A total game changer. But I need to secure my spot. I'm just 5,000 short. I closed my eyes, picturing him on the other end of the line, pacing with restless energy. The game changers never changed the game. They only cost me money, and him another piece of his pride. "Kevin, I can't," I said, the words heavy, with a weariness that went bone deep. "We've talked about this. I don't have that kind of money to just give away." The friendliness in his voice evaporated. "Right. Of course. You're sitting on a pile of cash from selling the old apartment. But you can't help your own son. I get it. Some things are more important than family." "It's not like that, son. That money is for my own expenses." "Yeah. Whatever. Dad," he said, the words clipped and sharp with resentment. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long moment. Another small debt of affection defaulted on. That night, sleep was a distant country. I couldn't reach. The silence of the house pressed in on me. Finally, I swung my legs out of bed. The floorboards were cold under my feet as I made my way to the closet. In the far back corner, hidden beneath my winter coats, was a single floorboard. I had loosened the day we moved in. I pried it up with my fingernails. There, nestled in the dark space between the joists, was my cedar box. I lifted it out. Its familiar weight, a comfort in my hands. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I opened the lid. The scent of old wood and paper was the smell of my real life. I bypassed the financial statements and lifted out the deed to this very house. Cecile Miller, owner. The words seemed to mock me. Beneath it lay my most precious treasure, a faded photograph of Eleanor, taken at a picnic a year before she got sick. She was laughing, her head thrown back, the summer sun catching the silver in her hair. I traced the outline of her smile. I don't know how much longer I can do this. "Ellie," I whispered to the smiling ghost in the photograph, "I'm so tired of the silence." A few days later, Brenda cornered me. She called it a family meeting, which meant it was an ambush. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I counted out her money. She was all business. "Dad, we need to talk about your rent," she said, sliding a sheet of paper across the granite countertop. It was a printout from Zillow, showing rental listings in our area, with bright red circles drawn around the prices. Comparable rooms in this neighborhood are going for $2,500, even $3,000. With inflation, property taxes, the cost of everything, we just can't afford to subsidize you anymore. I looked at the numbers, then at her face. A mask of cold justification. Subsidize me, in the house I paid for. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. "So, starting the 1st of November, she continued, folding her hands neatly on the table as if closing a deal, "the rent will be $2. Woo-bay. I think that's more than fair." My gaze drifted past her, out the window to the giant oak tree in the front yard. I had planted it as a sapling 20 years ago with Eleanor. We'd imagined our grandchildren climbing its branches. Now, its mighty limbs seemed to mock me, a symbol of a deep-rooted foundation I was no longer a part of. A switch flipped inside me, not with a loud bang, but with a quiet, decisive click. The performance was over. The game had ended. I pulled my eyes from the tree and met her gaze. My voice, when it came, was calm and clear. "No?" The word hung in the air, so alien in this house of compliance. Brenda's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "What do you mean?" "No," she asked, her voice losing its corporate polish. "I mean, no," I repeated, feeling a spine I thought had long since crumbled begin to straighten. I won't be paying you another $500 a month. A flicker of disbelief. Then anger crossed her face. She leaned back, a humorless smile playing on her lips. It didn't reach her eyes. "Fine," she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper that was far more menacing than a shout. "You have until the end of the month to either pay the new rate or find somewhere else to live. We need the room anyway." Chắc chắn rồi. Nối tiếp ngay từ khoảnh khắc căng thẳng ở cuối chương trước. Đây là bản thảo đầy đủ cho chương thứ 2. Được mở rộng chi tiết để đáp ứng yêu cầu về độ dài và chiều sâu của bạn. Brenda's words hung in the air long after she had turned and left the kitchen. The click-clack of her heels on the hardwood floor, sounding like nails being hammered into a coffin. "We need the room anyway." The sentence echoed in the cavernous silence of the room, stripping away the last, threadbare illusion of family I had clung to for 2 decades. I wasn't a father. I wasn't even a tenant anymore. I was an inconvenience. An obstacle. Just an old piece of furniture that had outlived its usefulness and needed to be cleared out to make space. I didn't move from the table for what felt like hours. The house grew dark around me. The setting sun, painting long. Mournful shadows across the floor. I didn't get up to turn on a light. I preferred the darkness. It felt like a fitting cloak for the thoughts that were beginning to coalesce in my mind. The deep, aching hurt that had been my constant companion for years was still there. But something new was crystallizing around it. It was cold, hard, and sharp. It was determination. For 20 years, I had played the part of the meek, grateful father, living on the charity of his children. I had paid my dues, absorbed the subtle and not so subtle insults, all in the name of keeping the peace, of preserving the fragile image of a family. I did it for Eleanor's memory, for the hope that one day my children would see past the dollar signs and see the man who loved them. But Brenda's ultimatum wasn't just about money. It was an eviction notice from their lives. She had finally given me the one thing I never knew I needed permission to stop trying. I finally pushed myself up from the chair, my joints groaning in protest. I walked through the dark living room, my hand trailing along the wall, my fingers brushed against the framed photos on the mantel. A family portrait from 10 years ago, all of us with strained, practiced smiles. A picture of Kevin at his college graduation, his eyes already looking past me for his next opportunity. A photo of Brenda and Mark on their wedding day, looking like a perfect couple from a magazine. They were all props in a play, and I was the stagehand who was no longer needed. I realized then, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that the family I was trying to save no longer existed. Perhaps it never really had. I was mourning a ghost, and you can't be evicted from a haunted house. That night, I did not go to my room to retrieve the cedar box. I didn't need to look at the deed to know who I was, or at Eleanor's picture to know what she would have wanted. She would have wanted me to live, not just exist. The decision was made. The war was over. And a new, quieter campaign was about to begin. The next morning, I was up before the sun, the house still wrapped in a pre-dawn stillness. I made my coffee and carried it not to the kitchen island, but to the small armchair in the corner of the living room. From my worn leather satchel, I pulled out my old tablet, a device Brenda had given me for Christmas 3 years ago. With the exasperated sigh of someone fulfilling an obligation, the screen flickered to life, its glow unnaturally bright in the dim room. My fingers, clumsy on the touch screen, typed a search query into the glowing white bar. Best real estate agents in Maple Creek, Ohio. The list was long, big, glossy faces with impossibly white teeth, smiled back at me. I scrolled past the ones whose slogans were full of aggressive promises and flashy sales records. I was looking for something else. My eyes landed on a name further down the page, David Chen. The photo was professional but understated, but it was the reviews that caught my attention. Words like discreet, thorough, handled a very sensitive family sale with the utmost professionalism, and a calming presence during a stressful process appeared again and again. He was exactly what I needed. I wrote down his number on a small notepad I kept in my pocket. I couldn't make the call from the house. There were too many ears. Too much risk of a stray question. After Brenda and Mark had left for work, I put on my walking shoes and a light jacket. Just going out for some air, I told Chloe, who gave me a concerned look but didn't press.